what some Obama officials were saying publicly was much different than what they were saying privately. James Clapper was out there saying that he had evidence that this was worse than Watergate, when in fact a few weeks later he was saying privately, I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with Russia. Samantha Power said, I am not in possession of anything. I am not in possession and didn't read or absorb any information that came out of the intelligence community suggesting collusion. Ambassador Rice, I don't recall intelligence or evidence to that effect. Former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, I can't say that if it existed or not. I don't recall that being briefed up to me. So it brings the question to light. Why then did we have many years of investigating collusion that these Obama administration officials never existed, they never saw any evidence of, but for 3 years the American people were dragged through the mud and told that their choice for the President of the United States might have been a Russian asset based on no evidence at all. This president was exonerated by the Mueller report, and there's some real questions for these individuals who are saying one thing publicly and another thing privately. Thank you so much. I think I got to all of you, and we'll be back soon. Pelosi bill has been entirely unacceptable. For instance, one of the things that I found really funny in her bill was she requires that the president appoint a medical supply response coordinator who would serve as the point of contact for the healthcare system, supply chain officials, and states on medical supplies. I don't know if Speaker Pelosi has just not been paying attention while she's been out in California and we've been here working, but I happened to be sitting by this so-called medical supply response coordinator on Air Force One yesterday. He's been around for quite some time. His name is Admiral Polovchek. So Polovchek is who's coordinating this, and perhaps she doesn't know that because Admiral P has been doing this for quite some time, but that's just an example of how quite odd the Pelosi bill is, packed full of liberal wish lists, like ensuring that illegal immigrants, for instance, get direct payments because they're not looking at Social Security numbers to verify that taxpayer dollars are going to actual taxpayers. So elements like that are non-starters, and then there's just really curious elements that really suggest if the speaker is even paying attention. Chanel.
Thank you, Kayleigh. But going back to the HEROES Act, the Speaker Pelosi presented it today for a vote, and you have members of her own party coming in and saying this is Washington politics at its worst. Does the White House get a sense that members of the Democrat Party are starting to grow less confident in Pelosi's leadership during this pandemic? Have you been communicating with anybody on the Democrat side?
So I haven't spoken to them directly, but I have seen some of the comments you're talking about, and it certainly would suggest that. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and what is Nancy Pelosi doing? She's saying she's exploiting the crisis and pushing for mass mail-in voting, even though we know it's more susceptible to voting fraud. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and this is what she's interested in pushing. Instead of talking about real measures like the payroll tax, which would be a tax break for low and middle income Americans, she's interested in removing the threshold for state and local tax deductions, which would essentially be a huge win for billionaires in California and New York. So it's really interesting right now that you have the party that says they're for working Americans saying let's remove the state and local tax threshold so that millionaires and billionaires get big payouts in states like California and New York, and you have the Republican Party and the party of President Trump saying let's lower the payroll tax so that low-income Americans who pay more payroll taxes than they do income taxes get a tax break. It's really interesting, the current posture of the two parties. Yes. Cited is an American state or territory outdoing what South Korea has done. And let's note that South Korea was the gold standard for testing. In fact, on March 13th, the Washington Post headline was, South Korea is doing 10,000 coronavirus tests a day. The U.S. is struggling for even a small fraction of that. And here we are on May 11th with a Washington Post headline. The administration keeps bragging that the U.S. testing now is better than South Korea's was a month ago. So you can't demand that we reach South Korea and then say that we're bragging when we do. This is a moment where the American private sector succeeded. This administration mobilized that testing. Every state is better off than South Korea at this moment. And that is a very good thing and something to be celebrated because it's American innovation at its best with 92 emergency use authorizations. And it's this administration under President Trump working. And again, I point you to the vice president's statement that he's inclined to believe that Flynn did not intentionally mislead him. And I'm asking back that all of you in your coverage endeavor to report what is a very scary story when the FBI is saying, let us get someone to lie. I've seen very scant coverage of that. It's a story worth reporting, and a story that I hope the American people, if you haven't heard it yet, are getting to hear for the very first time. But I certainly would like to bring it up, and that's the case of General Michael Flynn. What we've all learned from that should scare every American citizen. The fact that you had Jim Comey admitting in December of last year that he violated a protocol by directing agents to confront Flynn, something that he would not, quote, have gotten away with under previous administrations. The FBI told Flynn he didn't need a lawyer when they came to meet with him. McCabe told FBI agents that he didn't think Flynn was lying, and then all of that information we've learned over the last few months and years culminates in the fact that we have a handwritten FBI note that says, quote, we need to get Flynn to lie, quote, and get him fired. There was an unfair target on the back of General Michael Flynn. It should concern every American anytime there's a partisan pursuit of an individual, and that's certainly, at least those questions are raised with regard to General Michael Flynn, an honorable man who served his country.